Happy New Year, everybody. Welcome to 2025. Welcome back to my channel, Reading in the Dark. My name is Byron and I read sometimes. This video is going to be my a wrap-up of sorts and a top 10 list of everything I read in the grand old year of 2024. Cheers, 2024. I'm drinking some lovely Prosecco. I'm a fan. Anyway, I hope your holiday was great. In 2024, I read 31 books, which is great because I just wanted to read 26, a book every other week. And I found the paperback equivalents to all of the audiobooks that I read, and it amounts to 10,640 pages that I read. It's pretty good. In 2024, looks like I had 7 4-star reads and 4 5-star reads. And I put them in order, roughly. I would say the top 3 books on my list this year, I loved all of them so much. Coming in at number 10, this is crazy. This is a book that I was reading for so many months, in fact, maybe even a year. When No One Is Watching by Alyssa Cole, I went on a huge reading slump in the middle of reading this book. Yeah, it says on my Goodreads that I started reading it on February 2nd, 2023, and that I finished reading it on February 5th, 2024. So yeah, that's ridiculous. I reread the vast majority of it when I picked it up again in 2024. Sydney Green is Brooklyn born and raised, but the neighborhood she loves is being erased before her very eyes. For sale signs are popping up everywhere, and the neighbors she's known all of her life are disappearing. To preserve the past, Sydney channels her frustration into a walking tour, quote, Displaced, A People's History of Brooklyn, and finds an unlikely and unwanted assistant in one of the new arrivals to the block, her neighbor Theo. But Sydney and Theo's deep dive into the history of the neighborhood quickly becomes a dizzying descent into paranoia and fear. Their neighbors may not have moved to the suburbs after all, and the efforts to revitalize the community may be more deadly than advertised. This book is about gentrification, but it sort of turns it into a thriller horror setup. The neighbors that she's known her whole life are selling their places that said they never would and disappearing overnight, essentially. There's a hospital nearby, so there's intrigue and industrial intrigue involved. It went a little over the top for me, like all of the reveals and everything, when the thriller really became thrillery, but the vast majority of the book I loved so much. The way it discusses race and sort of with its tongue in its cheek as these two people, this black woman and this white man, sort of form a relationship. Alyssa Cole is just great at tackling those issues in a way that is true to the story, true to the character, and sort of like tongue-in-cheek, kind of. So this is number 10, When No One Is Watching. I recommend it. I don't think most people agree with my take on the end, so you probably won't. It's a great book. Okay, and then in number 9 is a book that I got on NetGalley, believe it or not. This is incredible. I can't believe this happened. Agony Hill by Sarah Stewart Taylor. Set in rural, I cannot say February, and I cannot say rural right now. You know how in blurbs the first sentence is not actually part of the synopsis? It's just like a tag to get your attention, and then the synopsis starts. I always read that and then skip it. In the hot summer of 1965, Bostonian Franklin Warren arrives in Bethany, Vermont to take a position as a detective with the state police. Warren's new home is on the verge of monumental change. The interstates are under construction, bringing new people, new opportunities, and new problems to Vermont. Warren has barely unpacked when he's called up to a remote farm on Agony Hill. Former New Yorker and back-to-the-lander Hugh Weber seems to have set fire to his barn and himself, with the door barred from the inside, but things aren't adding up for Warren. As he gets to know his new home and grapples with the tragedy that brought him there, Warren is drawn to the people and traditions of small-town Vermont, even as he finds darkness amidst the beauty. What I loved about this book, and I wrote in my review, and I think I mentioned in a wrap-up recently, was that the book takes its time. It sort of gives you the feeling of being in a small town, even though progress is looming, and some people don't like that, and you can relate to that. It still is a small town, and the book has a languid sort of pace to it. It's a small town, and you can feel it in the way it's written even. It's beautifully written. I loved the characters and the character of the town itself. This was a deep dive into character and setting while also being sort of a mystery. And in that way, I guess you could sort of say it's kind of a cozy, but I really, really liked it. Agony Hill. And then there's going to be a second book out in August of this year, 2025. That's awesome. Called Hunter's Heart Ridge. So number 8 is They Do It With Mirrors by Agatha Christie. I read a lot of Agatha Christie this year. I just really liked this one. When Jane Marple goes to stay with her old and rather frail friend Carrie Louise at her sprawling Victorian Gothic mansion, she soon begins to realize that not all is well there. Not only is this the family home, but it is also a rehabilitation center for delinquent boys. Then an attempt is made on the life of Carrie Louise's husband, her stepson is shot to death, and someone tries to poison Carrie Louise. Yeah, so you've got the weirdness of some like mentally and emotionally unwell young people living in the same building with this family, and the way someone dies, it's one of those it's impossible, how could that have happened scenarios, like where someone's in a locked room or something, and there's a sound outside, and then anyway, the way it all works together I found really, really satisfying, really, really fun. I listened to this on audiobook and it was read by Rosemary Leach. She does an amazing American accent, because the Carrie Louise character is an American. And in some of these, when they're not great at an American accent, which I know is very hard to do, sometimes it's a little distracting, so she was amazing. And I wish that she had narrated all 12 of the Marple mysteries, because I loved her narration. So that was number 8. Now, so number 7, oddly, is a book I just finished, and that is literally A Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens. I listened to this audiobook of it narrated / performed by Sir Patrick Stewart. It's A Christmas Carol. Charles Dickens is very funny. Patrick Stewart is an incredible character actor. He creates all of these different people. I have to tell you, I have seen so many versions of A Christmas Carol, as we all have. I watch them up at Christmas Carol every year, and this time, just listening to it in the car to and from work, Patrick Stewart had me in tears. Like, he really got me. There is something about the book. There's a scene where Bob Cratchit comes home from scoping out the location for Tiny Tim's his burial plot, and you learn in this scene that his body is in their home waiting to be buried, which was, I'm sure, very common at that time. And he goes into the room with his son's body and weeps over it, and boy, Patrick Stewart went there and got me good. When you read it, especially if you can get through it in one sitting, and I listened to all of it on Christmas Eve, actually, believe it or not. I listened to it in the car, and then I listened to it at home while I was baking and stuff. If you can get through it all in one sitting or at one time, it really, it heightens the impact of that journey and just how joyful it is at the end. It's so weird that it's on this list, but it is one of the 10 my favorite experiences I had reading a book this year. Number 6 on my list, Salem's Lot by Stephen King. Ben Mears has returned to Jerusalem's Lot in hopes that exploring the history of the Marston House, an old mansion long the subject of rumor and speculation, will help him cast out his personal devils and provide inspiration for his new book. But when 2 young boys venture into the woods and only one returns alive, Mears begins to realize that something sinister is at work. In fact, his hometown is under siege from forces of darkness far beyond his imagination. Yeah, it's vampires. It's gothic, it's spooky, it's longish. It's not super long. It was the paperback or the Kindle edition is 668 pages. Okay, that's tome territory. It didn't feel that long though, and I did read it with my eyes on my Kindle. It was not an audiobook. David and I buddy read this, and we had a lot of fun talking about how things were getting worse. It's fun to watch the progression of the infestation and to sort of learn the backstory of this guy who was originally from this town, and his relationship with the house, because he went in it once when he was younger and like saw something, and it's done so well. Like, if you want a vampire book other than Dracula, like, it's so great. It was my first time reading chunky Stephen King. I'm reading his books in order, and I read Carrie, and then we finally read this, and of course it was just a very memorable experience because it's such a classic, it's such a great book, and it has never had a good movie apparently, because I did see the one that just came out, and I gotta tell you, no, that ain't it. All right, now for something a little bit different. In the number 5 position, this is Evenings and Weekends by Oisin McKenna. London, 2019. It's the hottest June on record, and a whale is stuck in the Thames River. In the streets of the city, 4 old acquaintances want more from life than they've been given. On the summer solstice, the longest day of the year, their paths will intersect at a party that will change their lives forever. Maggie, a once hopeful artist turned waitress, is pregnant and preparing to move back to her hometown with her boyfriend and father-to-be, Ed, leaving the city she loves and a life she imagined for herself. Ed, coasting through life as a barely competent bike courier, is ready for a new start with Maggie and their baby, if only to finally leave behind his secret past of hooking up with strange men in train station bathrooms. and his secret past with Maggie's best friend, Phil. As the temperature continues to climb, Maggie, Ed, and Phil will have to confront their shared past's current desires and limits of their future lives together before the weekend is over. Strikingly heartfelt, sexually charged, and disarmingly comic, it's addictive, page-turning, mesmerizing. Yes! It was so good. It was so mesmerizing. This is a bisexual character who is having some bisexual panic because his girlfriend is going to have a baby, and they're going to go do the parenting thing, and they're going through the motions of doing that, and he has a reason to suddenly start to panic. He thinks someone maybe saw him in a situation. Yeah, just leave it at that. I remember crying and laughing, and it's just such a wonderful experience as a gay man in 2025 to read a heartfelt, authentic representation of queer life written by a queer author. It was just wonderful. It's not about vampires. It's not like beautiful literary lyric prose. It's just a beautiful story with great characters, and it offered me something that I don't get very often in my reading life. I loved it. I loved it, I loved it, I loved it. I gave it 4 stars, and it kind of sounds like it was a 5-star read now that I talk about it more, but yeah, that was Evenings and Weekends by Oisin McKenna at number 5. Number 4. This is my hot take of the video. I need to drink this before it gets like warm. A Quitter's Paradise by Elysha Chang. This book does not have a great rating on Goodreads. 2.85. I'm surprised by that. I just thought it was so great. I gave it 5 stars immediately with no hesitation. Eleanor is doing just fine. Sure, she's hiding things from her husband. True, she quit her PhD program and is now conducting unauthorized research on illegitimately procured mice. And yes, her mother is dead, and Eleanor has yet to return to her house to go through her things. But what else is she supposed to feel, exactly? What shape can grief take when you didn't understand the person you've lost? As A Quitter's Paradise follows Eleanor's winding journey to make sense of herself and her grief, her story is interwoven with those of her family members, from her parents' lives in the military villages of Taipei, to their early days as immigrants in New York City, to Eleanor and her sister's childhoods. Somehow, despite deep rifts in time, distance, and perspective, the Lus remain a family. But what does that truly mean, and what is it that what holds a family together can also be what pulls it apart? That sentence is crazy. Yeah, it's just literary fiction. It's just general fiction. I hate the phrase literary fiction. It's just general fiction. It's about this woman who is brilliant and has all this potential, but is sort of not living up to it. She's underachieving. She has a very accomplished and successful and continually ascending husband in medical science that she works with, and she's sort of like spent her whole life achieving, but she's not motivated. And I found it fascinating to read a messy character, to read a character who is making mistakes and is screwing up, and kind of knows that she is. It's not inspirational, but it felt so real, and it felt earned, and it felt fair. I also absolutely adored all of the flashbacks to her parents with moving to the United States and struggling to find a way to make a living. And the book is really funny. It reminded me of Otessa Moshfegh. A lot of people didn't like it, I think, because they don't like the character, because she's not heroic and she's not someone you can look up to, really. And that's fine with me. She was fascinating to read, and that's all I care about. And yes, people didn't like this book, and it was my 4th favorite book of the year. Now we are in the top 3. These are all 5 stars, and they're all excellent. Number 3, Nosferatu by Joe Hill. You guys, this book was so effing good, I could not believe it. I'd heard it was good. I also heard it was long. It's both. It is so long, and it is so good. It was 995 pages worth of audiobook, which is about 20 hours. But oh my gosh. It's like a Christmassy themed horror epic. Victoria McQueen has a secret gift for finding things. A misplaced bracelet, a missing photograph, answers to unanswerable questions. On her Rally Tough Burner bike, she makes her way to a rickety covered bridge that within moments takes her wherever she needs to go, whether it's across Massachusetts or across the country. Charles Talent Manx has a way with children. He likes to take them for rides in his 1938 Rolls-Royce Wraith with the Nosferatu NOS4A2 vanity plate. With his old car, he can slip right out of the everyday world and onto the hidden roads that transport them to an astonishing and terrifying playground he calls Christmasland. Then one day, Vic goes looking for trouble and finds Manx. That was a lifetime ago. Now, Vic, the only kid to ever escape Manx's unmitigated evil, is all grown up and desperate to forget. But Charlie Manx never stopped thinking about Victoria McQueen. He's on the road again and he's picked up a new passenger, Vic's own son. I loved the magical mechanics of this supernatural horror story. And I found the character of Manx to be so unique and messed up. The world building is incredible. The mechanics of the magic, it's fascinating. It's so fun. The characters are incredible. They're real people. They make mistakes. They're funny. They're bad. They're mean to each other. They let themselves down. They let the reader down. And then they are heroic and do great things. And it is funny to me that I never really thought of it as a Christmas book. Christmas Land is there. There's lots of Christmassy themed stuff, but it's all horrible. Like, the main characters of this book will never celebrate Christmas again. And I have to say, I can't separate the book from the audiobook, which was narrated / performed by Kate Mulgrew. She was so good. I believe she received an Audie Award nomination for this book. It was a 20-hour audiobook. I listened to it on 1X. I did not have it on 1.25 or 1.5. I listened to it on 1. It was 20 hours. I go back a lot when I'm listening to audiobooks because I have a hard time focusing on what I'm hearing when I'm driving. And yet I just was so sad for it to end. I did not want it to be over. It was just so great. This was 5 stars, 5 enthusiastic stars. It's so, so great. Number 2 on my list, my second favorite read of the year in 2024. The Good House by Tananarive Due. Angela hoped her grandmother's famous healing magic could save her failing marriage while she and her family lived in the old house in the summer of 2001. Instead, an unexpected tragedy ripped Angela's family apart. 2 years later, Angela is moving past her grief and is finally ready to revisit the rural house she loved so much as a child. But back in Sacagawea, she discovers she hasn't been the only one to suffer a shocking loss. Could the events be linked to a terrifying entity her grandmother battled in 1929? It's so funny because I read this book over a very long period of time. I was reading this like 1 chapter a night. And it was making me crazy because I loved the book and I wanted to keep going, but I was really tired and I can't remember what was going on at that time. But I just didn't have the energy, so I kept falling asleep. But I was like, this is crazy because I love this book. So it took me a month to read. I loved the way the main character was written. She was obstinate, she was angry, but she was relatable. She moves on to a new job as a talent agent, and she has like an actress who's like a friend of hers, but who is also starting to get more and more jobs on TV and stuff and in film, who's famous, and their friendship is really, really nice to read. It is really, really sort of comforting and sweet. I really enjoyed her relationship with her son, Corey. The friendship that he strikes up with this white kid in the neighborhood, it's unique. It's something I hadn't read before, but it's the history. Again, it's the history of the house. It's the ancient history of her grandmother and the magic that is involved that really makes this book shine and makes it so memorable. I remember the house, I remember the woods, and I remember all of those flashbacks and the weather and the storms and the things that happen that are related to magic and like evil. It's so atmospheric. And at the end of the day, the finale of the story, it just felt like a proper finale. It did not stay in the realm of realism. It was fantastical, it was on another level and a little bit abstract, and it felt big and proportional to the story and to the length of the book. I feel like when you read a really long book, you need it to amount to something greater than a normal length book does. You need it to be a little bit epic, and it did that. The Good House by Tananarive Due, big fan. That's number 2 on my list with 5 stars. And now, my favorite read of the year. This is not going to shock most people. The Shining by Stephen King. I've never seen the movie, by the way. I didn't love the clips that I saw when I was younger, and I was like, I don't like the color palette or something. So I wasn't interested, and I just never really watched it. And then I had a friend who, they were having all these spooky movie nights, and The Shining was on their list, and I said, ooh, okay, I'm going to read the book before that night. Because my friend was like, I want you to come. And I was like, well, I haven't read it yet. And he's like, oh, you don't have to read it. And I was like, I have to read it first. So I was like, well, great, because now I'll actually know something about The Shining, and maybe I won't be missing out on whatever it is that makes it so scary that people have to put it in the freezer. I read this book in a binge session. I read it in like 2 days. Actually vlogged it, and one day that vlog will come out. Had an amazing time. I mean, I created some really great atmosphere throughout the house because David was out of town. Finished it just in time to go to my friends, and then as a result of that experience, I was so worn out that I got sick. And then I couldn't go anyway, which is, of course, that happened. The Shining. I'm gonna read you the blurb in case you don't know. Jack Torrance's new job at the Overlook Hotel is the perfect chance for a fresh start. As the off-season caretaker at the atmospheric old hotel, he'll have plenty of time to spend reconnecting with his family and working on his writing. But as the harsh winter weather sets in, the idyllic location feels ever more remote and more sinister. And the only one to notice the strange and terrible forces gathering around the Overlook is Danny Torrance, a uniquely gifted 5-year-old. So Danny is his son. Jack has a not great relationship with his wife. He has a history of being abusive. He's also an alcoholic, trying to stay sober. His son is interesting. They go to this hotel and they're thinking, oh, we're gonna be shut in together. It'll actually be romantic. This will be great for my writing and it'll be great for us. The very first thing that happens when they get there, he is told that the boiler for the hotel should never go above a certain pressure, like PSI, because it's old and rickety. And it's in the basement, so he needs to maintain it because it'll creep up over time. So he has to continually go down into the basement, check on the boiler, and turn it back down so that it doesn't explode. What an amazing way to start a novel, and what a wonderful literal and figurative foundation for a horror story where the suspense keeps rising. This book is so great. I loved the world building of the hotel and its past and its history. It kind of reminded me of The Haunting of Hill House by Shirley Jackson. It also reminded me of the hotel season from American Horror Story, where there's so many things that have happened in this specific location, this hotel before, and the ghosts are all around. The atmosphere and the setting are just so riveting and fantastic. But the other thing I loved about this book was the Shining itself. It's such a neat device, and I don't want to go into too much detail about what that is because I don't want to give anything away. I loved The Shining. I loved it. And it's wild to me that it was his third novel. He published Carrie, and then Salem's Lot, and then The Shining. That's insane. Those are all great horror novels. I will never forget the 2 days that I spent in my house with crazy ambiance videos of hotels and fireplaces and snow and candles lit everywhere while I was just obsessively reading this book. I mean, how long is this book? 674 pages. I think I started having read maybe 5% of it, and then I read the rest in 2 days. Yeah, it was a really memorable experience, and I want to read it again, and actually David has not read it yet. So I don't know, I might reread it. I might read it with him because I want to re-experience it because it was so good. And I want to experience it while he experiences it for the first time because I know he's going to love it. The Shining is everything. The Hedges, you guys. The Shining, that was number 1. So those are my top 10. Those are the top 10 books that I read this year. Now, I do have some thoughts. The one thing I will say, I was mood reading most of 2024. I just wanted to keep reading, and if I was I don't know what to read, and I'm not in the mood for this, and I'm not in the mood for that, and I was being wishy-washy, I would just pick up a Murder, She Wrote book or something really, really easy, and I was constantly listening to Miss Marple so that I could keep my reading going. And I wasn't really pushing myself or challenging myself. I wasn't really reading with intention. I think I read 3 authors of color, people who were not white, 2 black authors and 1 Asian author. And I read 1 Own Voices queer novel. That's not good enough, and I know that, and I've done much better than that in years past, so I'm going to do better than that in 2025. I'm going to read with intention again. Some diversity would be great. I also need to address the fact that I have clearly transitioned to just basically reading horror and mystery. It's becoming my thing. I'm not going to only read that, but it's going to be most of what I read, and it wasn't always the case on this channel. I read lots of quote literary fiction, and historical fiction used to be my jam. As I've been reading more, I've gravitated towards horror and mystery, and I think that's great. I'm glad that I figured out what I always know I will enjoy if I'm in a slump. But that doesn't mean I'm not going to continue to read those other things. I want to make an effort to do a little bit better. I also have this sense that an audiobook in my car needs to be a mystery. For some reason, I really like the way it feels to have a whodunit kind of unravel bit by bit each time I get in the car and then have there be like an intermission because I go to work or I go to sleep and then the next day I get back in the car and find out more. I like the way that format works with an audiobook in my car. And I don't listen to audiobooks at home, almost ever. I listen to them in the car. I like that. I like keeping the book in the car, and it makes it easier to keep it separate in my mind from whatever I'm reading on paper or on my Kindle. But I do need to open my mind. It's like it doesn't have to only be cozy mysteries in the car. So that's something that I'm going to keep in mind. So those are my top 10 books of the year. A few of the stats on my books, and also my plans for this next year, where I will read with intention and open my mind to audiobooks that are not cozy mysteries, maybe. If you made it all this way, thank you so very much for your dedication in watching this lengthy video where I just tell you about what I read. If you have any thoughts on the books that I read, please leave them in the comments below. I love hearing from you guys. I've gotten some great suggestions of videos past in the comment section. The comment section is your friend. Let me know in the comments also, what are your plans for the year? What are your goals reading-wise, numerically, but also like in terms of genre and diversity and whatnot? I'd love to hear about all that kind of stuff. Are there any challenges that you're taking part in? I hope you had a wonderful year of reading. I hope you had a wonderful year just in general. And I hope that, like me, you're able to look forward to this new year as a fresh, clean slate. So that's plenty for one video. Thank you so much for watching. And until next time, I will be here in the dark reading. Cheers.